Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. And here we are. I'd like you to focus on the word becoming. That's what this is about, becoming the luckiest teacher in America. Joy? An Iowa cornfield. I come from a long line of teachers and farmers in Iowa. My father was a graduate of the University of South Dakota. He was also in the First World War as a lieutenant. He was a history major, became a history teacher, a principal, and a superintendent in a small town in Iowa. My mother, a farm daughter, did what most of them did in that time, and this is in the early 1900s. She went to Iowa State University. It was a college then for the 2-year domestic program for farmers' daughters, so they could then become, of course, farmers' wives and know how to operate the business of farming. She knew she had a globe, and she knew everything about the world, but she'd never been out of Iowa. My brother was born, and he was 10 years older than I. My sister, 4 years older than I. And they lived a modest but a good life in a small town in Iowa. He became a history teacher, a principal, and a superintendent. The Great Depression struck. And with that, of course, he lost his job. Why? Because they closed the schools. They could not pay the teachers. They survived for about a year, and then he decided he had to find a job, and he went to Des Moines, the city, in order to find something. He did. He found a job as a night warehouseman for Standard Oil Company. He spent the rest of his life as a warehouseman for Standard Oil. But he knew history, and he read. We were poor. Everybody around us was poor, so it was not a problem. My mother, as I say, knew all about the world. My father read all about it. We had a radio, a Globe, National Geographic, the Des Moines Register, and a library card. That was our entertainment. My father also played the violin. This is how I grew up, in an emotionally stable family, but we had no money. It was an interesting experience, and I'm glad for it. As things went along, things got better, of course, World War II, and I grew up and went to high school, Theodore Roosevelt High School in Des Moines, Iowa. A larger school, a good school. But there something happened. I met students who were their lives were very different from mine. They lived on another part of the town, the city, and in Des Moines, 3 major industries: the agriculture industry, the insurance industry, and publishing. I don't know whether you realize that Des Moines was one of the centers of publishing at the time. Meredith Publishing published Look Magazine, Better Homes and Gardens, and many others. They still publish Better Homes and Gardens and many farm journals. These people I met, these friends of mine, their parents worked for the Des Moines Register. One was a columnist on the editorial board. One mother was a society columnist. You know, the society page with the weddings and all of that. Have you ever heard of Quentin Reynolds, the journalist out of New York? He was big in the time. I know this goes back a ways. But he would come from New York and stay overnight with her parents. And I learned so much about journalism and about books. They had walls of books. One friend even had tennis courts in her backyard. This was a different world for me. There was a problem. When I went to high school, they put me in the academic track. We had 2 tracks, vocational and academic. I don't know who put me there, somebody did. I ended up, of course, the lowest one in the class. Everybody was smarter than I was. But that was okay, I enjoyed it. I loved English, I loved history, journalism. We did have a journalism course. Everybody had journalism in Des Moines. And it was a comfortable situation, but I just knew that they were different from what I had. I want you to go to your 10th grade biology class. Formaldehyde. Can you still smell it? I can. All right. I walk in. Science and math are not my thing at all. On each tray you have is a frog, a dead one. We are to dissect the frogs. You can dissect the frog, and you can dissect the frog. Okay, everybody starts dissecting the frogs. No, I don't think so. He's doing it. Mr. Mishner, tall, middle-aged, swim coach. He walks up to me finally and he does not say, Marjorie, you will dissect the frog. No. He says, Marjorie, you'll dissect the frog. Great teaching lesson. You can do it. You can do it. I dissected the frog. Went on to college and I had to dissect a pig in zoology. But I loved high school. It was great. Worked on the newspaper and so forth. But as a senior, we all had to join have an appointment with the girls' advisor. And that was fine. And so I went into Miss Greta Wolf, and she asked me what I'd like to do. I was going to college, and I thought, well, I'd like to be an attorney. And she thought that was cute. I could be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. Well, I knew I didn't want to be a secretary because they took shorthand. And I didn't like those little squiggles and so forth that they did. So I didn't think I wanted that. And I knew from the frog experience I wasn't going to be a nurse. So I could be a teacher. I sort of had a little inkling about what that was about. And so then she said, well, where will you be going to school? And I said, well, I had the choice of the University of Iowa. My brother graduated from there in journalism. Or Monmouth College in Illinois, a small United Presbyterian liberal arts college, 800 students. My sister graduated with elementary education from there, so that would work. I'd better go to Monmouth because those smart kids in my class were going to the University of Iowa, and I knew enough about the university, and they had this fabulous writer's workshop, which is still famous today, and I thought, I can't compete there, so I'll go to Monmouth. Thinking, of course, that would be easier. Wrong. I went to Monmouth only to learn that it was famous or renowned for its chemistry and pre-med students and pre-theology students. It was a very strict United Presbyterian school, but I liked rules, I liked restrictions, I worked well with it. So I became an English major, of course, there, and it was a very small department. But it had excellent teachers. Small classes, 15 for a maximum. That was early on. Now, my sophomore year...
You want me to go to the next slide?
Yes. Look at this picture, and up about the second floor, the window. This is Doc Owen's Shakespeare class. Here's the textbook. I used it for 25 years. I had many copies of other Shakespeare, the comedies, the tragedies, the histories. I had a set from Oxford. This is the one I used. Doc Owen would stand at that window with looking out at the campus with his back to us. Now, he was about ready to retire. He was revered at Monmouth. And he would start to talk. And then he would start to quote something. And he would say, Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 4. We'd go right through. Oh, okay. And we'd follow him. And then he'd talk. And then he'd quote things. And that was how he taught. Shakespeare, he put in my heart. I had it right here. I still have it. It took a long time for it to get up to my brain. But finally, after many years, it made it. I graduated. Oh, wait a minute. So I go to I sent off, I'm going to be teaching. I sent off 3 letters to Allison. I sent to New Trier High School in Chicago. I sent to 2 other schools up there, schools up there to apply to be a teacher because I wanted to go to Chicago. I had this boyfriend in Monmouth called Tom Posey, and he was from Chicago. And so I thought that was the place I wanted to be, and all my friends were from Chicago. So I sent these letters off, and they all came back rejecting me. Another wonderful lesson in life. It just leads to so many interesting things. So I was with my senior house mother, and she said, Maggie, what are you going to do now? Are you going to teach? I said, well, I've been rejected from everything. I think I can go back to Des Moines and work at the Iowa State Fair in August, because I knew I could get a job there. I had worked as a waitress my way through school for my board and room, and I had become head waitress, and it was a very formal dining situation for our ladies faculty. And so she knew me well. And she looked at me and she said, why don't you become an airline stewardess? I said, Mrs. Burgess, I've never been in an airplane. And she said, that doesn't make any difference. Okay. So I wrote to United, I knew because it flew into Des Moines. I wrote to, American, they must fly all over America. And TWA, Trans World Airlines, okay, that sounds pretty good too. So I sent off 3 letters. Never heard from American. United offered me an interview in Chicago. But a letter came back to me from Kansas City. My letter had crossed the desk of a woman there. And she looked at it. She wrote to me that she was from Oquawka, Illinois. Oquawka, Illinois is on the banks of the Mississippi River. Tiny little village, about 30 miles from Monmouth. And she said in her letter that she saw I had graduated from there, and she would take any young woman who graduated from Monmouth College. And she offered me a job. And so my first flight in an airplane was to go and become an airline stewardess. Why? I don't know, but I loved it, so that was great. And there we are with TWA. Okay, now I get to here. This is my college graduation picture, and I show it because only a month or so later, here we are. Notice the hairdos. This is TWA. Regulation, rules, restrictions. It was sort of just like Monmouth. I'm the short one, the tall one. Look at the hemlines. They're all the same. There were about 30 girls probably in the class. And this was a totally different experience for me. I loved it. The reason we had the haircuts, why? Why did we have the haircuts? The hat had to sit on them. And those are tough hats. I love that picture. Anyway, so, all right. Now, in the airline, we had to memorize everything. It was totally different from literary analysis, which I was used to by that time. It was rote memory. Our first lesson, we memorized all the codes for the destinations of TWA in America and the world. One lesson. I still have some of the notes from that. That was very difficult. Then we have to memorize the exteriors of the planes. Martin 202A, Martin 404, a DC-4, and a Lockheed Constellation. And that's flaps and ailerons and so forth. Now, the next thing we have to do is memorize the high officials in TWA, so that in case they're on our flight, we can memorize the pictures and their names, so we can memorize, we can greet them and say, welcome to flight such and such. I never had any of them on my flights. This was how it went, and I did thoroughly enjoy it, but it was difficult. Now, this girl, the second one from the end there, was my roommate, and we went to Chicago for our domicile. It was, everything in the airline is seniority, so of course we had the lowest flights. And my first flight, which lasted for about 5 months, was Chicago, Dayton, Columbus, Wheeling, Washington, Baltimore, stay overnight, and all the way back, hopscotch back. A meal service out of Chicago to Dayton, and I landed frequently with the trays on the floor because it's a short hop, even in a prop airplane. And that was a Martin 404. TWA, safety was absolutely the first thing. Passenger comfort was the second important thing. And then calm. Always calm and pleasant. At that time, there were many first-time flyers, just as I had been, and they were nervous. And the other group that we would have were the traveling businessmen, and they were more experienced. Passenger comfort. You had to be able to spot a passenger who was in discomfort. Many people at that time would be airsick. Now today you get on an airplane and fly, and you don't very often see that. Very rarely. But then you did. And of course those airplanes went up and down and around and boom. And so we had to be able to take care of that. And we did. Now notice the connection between what we did, safety, passenger comfort, and calm. Same thing in teaching. Safety, student comfort, and calm. It worked perfectly. One problem, a serious problem. The traveling businessman, for some reason in 1952, airline hostesses and stewardesses were fair game, or so they thought. And we were not pleased. I cannot tell you the times, the innuendos, the suggestions, the wink, the pinch. It was terrible, and we could not react with anything but pleasant calm. It was sexual harassment before the words were common. It was terrible. But we figured out a way, and the way was distraction. Oh, sir, may I see your ticket again? You have a transfer, don't you, in Philadelphia? Is that right? Anything to distract him. Thank you. That was tough, very tough. So anyway, now as I was going to get married, I decided, to this guy, my boyfriend. And so after 5 months of flying this Chicago, Dayton, Columbus, and on, I decided I wanted something a little more exciting than that. So I bid reserve, which was a substitute. And that was great because it ended up that I was lucky and was able to fly with that beautiful airplane, the Super Constellation, one of the most beautiful airplanes ever designed. It carried 81 passengers, and they would just call and say, be at the airport. And this was out of Midway, of course. O'Hare wasn't built yet. But on this flight, the flights that I usually got on this one was out of New York City. After the Broadway shows closed, it came out with the celebrities because it was going to Los Angeles. So the New York crew brought it to Chicago. They got off. Our ramp crew got on and made up the berths on it. There were 3 seats, and then they had double berths. And and in the back was a cocktail lounge with champagne, caviar, all of that. And then in Chicago, when we got on, it was well after midnight. Of course, it was 3 hours from New York to Chicago, and then 7.5 hours to LA. We got on and took it to LA. So that was when you met celebrities. They were on that flight. Then we'd have about a day and a half before we would, and as a sub, reserve, I would deadhead home usually on whatever flight they could get to Chicago for me to get home. And then, I'd be home a day and then off again to some place like that. And it was a wonderful time. And I was happy I did it. But then I decided to get married, and I knew I was going to get married in June, so then I left the airline. But it was one of the best experiences of my life, and I'm very grateful for it. By the way, one of the girls in that picture you saw, she stayed with him. She was my roommate, and she was a career hostess, and I had heard, I can't verify it, but I had heard that she was the hostess on the flight that took Nixon to Moscow, eventually. But by that time, she was well up in TWA and one of their major factors in the hostess program. So anyway, that was that, and I got married. Now, Tom was based in the Army Chemical Center in Edgewood, Maryland. And so that's where we went. He was a private in the SPP program, which was specialized something personnel. And they were all physics, chemists, and so forth. He had been a physics major in college. So that was great, but now I had to go get a job. So I went to the county district, and they offered me a job in this school in a small town, and I went my first year of teaching. And that's why I say your first year of for teachers is generally not a good year. It was a school with no curriculum. There was a textbook. They gave me a complete schedule of all classes, seniors, academic and vocational, journalism, and the paper had gone defunct, and so then they decided, okay, start a newspaper in a journalism class and 9th grade. And the problem was really they gave me, I was going to be the senior advisor. Now I'm 23 years old. And some of those seniors were 19. And then one day the principal called me in. I'd been there about 3 months. And he said to me, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, if you are, I have to fire you." It was about 6 months into that year when he had a nervous breakdown, left school, and we never had another administrator. The other thing about the school was that there was no interaction among the faculty. Clearly, they weren't very happy with their jobs. At senior graduation, 9 girls in the senior class were pregnant and unmarried. It was a sad situation, but I learned how not to teach, and I made it through it. It didn't completely sour me on the idea of teaching, but it did not help. Tom got out of the service, and he wanted to go back to the University of Illinois and do what he really wanted to do, which was become a civil engineer. We went back to the University of Illinois. And there, I had to get a job. He was happy. He was going to be in construction. I went over to the university placement office. I didn't want a teaching job, but I needed something. He said, they looked at my credentials and they said, oh, you work for TWA? Yes. Well, there's a place at the Institution of Aviation. I didn't know anything about this. In 1949, the University of Illinois started the first Institute of Aviation. And there we had 13 flight instructors. It was a small airstrip outside Champaign-Urbana, a Quonset hut, and a hangar. And I was to be kind of a girl Friday to the other gal who was a GI wife too, and about my age, but she was kind of running the office. So she was overloaded and I could help her. So off I went. And it was fun. But these students, think how many students were taking private pilot lessons at that time. Why? Because flying had sort of become something you wanted to do. The flight instructors were all out of World War II in Korea, and they were good. The Aranca is that airplane up there. It was sort of like a Piper Cub, and those kids learned to fly that. Now, they had a link trainer in the hangar, but they also had to pack their own parachutes. That's risk. That's believing in what you're doing. That's wanting to do it. And what I learned there was what I wanted to do, that energy, the excitement. And I'd watch them try to land, and they'd be wobbling, and then they'd make it. And I said, the kid can do it. He can do it. So that was the first thing there. The second thing there was if they passed their private instruction, their private pilot's life, they could take aerobatics. And that's that one. Open cockpit, double wing, bi-wing, bow wing, Stearman. Wonderful airplane. This is a picture of it. And then this happens to be Paul's Paul's Bonanza, V-tail, Beechcraft Bonanza, and that was a charter service that we had for the university professors. They went from where we were to the Meigs Field. You Chicagoans know Meigs Field. And then the professors would go wherever they were going. And one of my favorite ones with that is the fact that the guy I remember is the fellow who invented the nozzle on the Ready Whip can. Remember that? He invented that. He went all over the world selling that thing. Yeah, so that was fun. And I loved it. Okay, Tom graduates. And he gets a job with Draveau Corporation in Pittsburgh. And Draveau, if any of you were from Lehigh, they were known for their engineers. And so we start. And now we have the map. And we moved for 9 years. Oh, and I had another baby. We moved for 9 years. I had a baby in Urbana when he was in college. Okay, we have 2 boys. Moved from Pittsburgh all the way down here at the Ohio River. For 9 years, we were living in hovels, cabins, camps. We were river rats, and he loved it. He was on the river. You know the evergreen that they just dislodged from the Suez? Well, we were always getting calls at 3 o'clock in the morning or something that a barge had hit a pier or something like that. So that was common. What did I do? I knew what to read. I knew the authors. I read for 9 years on the Ohio River, no social life, and I loved it. I knew exactly what I wanted to read. And that's what gave me my literary background, was 9 years of reading there. We ended up in a little town called Madison, Indiana. 3 years, it was wonderful. I taught for the Ursuline nuns, and I wasn't Catholic. It was the time of Vatican II, and I also taught at Madison High School as a sub. Now, I have many stories, but I can't go into all of those. We're on our way then. The next the next assignment is Lafayette, Louisiana. He's to build the substructure of the Interstate 10. You may have been on that bridge at Whiskey Bay of the Chafalaya River. This is heart of Cajun country. It's really swamp area, but it was a lovely place. The kids are in school by now, and so 3rd grade and 7th grade. And Tom, the older one, Tom Jr., comes home and he's having trouble. They never had, you can imagine the schools these kids were in all along. But anyway, he had never had any problem in school, and he came home and he had problems. And well, Tom, you just have to do it. Well, he couldn't. So I decided I'd better go see the teacher, and I did. I made an appointment. And he was very nice. There was one problem. I could not understand a single word he said. He spoke Cajun English, not Cajun French. They're not that different. So I went home very discouraged. What are we going to do? These kids have been in and out of, we've led this nomadic life, and it happens that Tom said at that time he had a job with Draveau. I mixed up my series here, but that's okay. And so we went to Pittsburgh. And when we got there, he had picked out 3 houses. One in, you'll know, the Pittsburghers will know this, one in Sewickley Heights, one in Ben Avon, and one in Mount Lebanon. And I knew Mount Lebanon School District, and I wanted to be there. And there is the old Mount Lebanon School District, which is still there. At the time I arrived, which is 1969, 68, 69, I taught in this school, and we kept that one, but at the time they were building a 6-story addition on the back of that, and it was wonderful. So we moved to Mount Lebanon, put the kids in school, one in junior high and one in grade school. They'd been around so much. And after I got the house settled, about a week or so, I went over to the school district offices, and I said, I'd like to apply to be a substitute teacher here. And they said, all right, we'll call you. And a little while went by, and they called. When I walked into that Mount Lebanon High School, I knew I was home. It was just like the Institute of Aviation at University of Illinois. The halls were packed with wonderful adolescent chaos, trauma, tragedy, comedy, love, hate. The whole thing is all right there, 5 minutes between classes. And I said, this is where I want to be. And so I do it occasionally. They'd call me, and I did it. And then one time they called me and said they had an older teacher who was about ready to retire. She'd had a small accident, and then she was going to be off for 30 days. Would I take it? I said, yes, I'll take it. So I went in. There's a curriculum. There's lesson plans, and so forth. But at that one, the 30-day one, no lesson plan book. The other thing I noticed was I'd go to the faculty room for a cup of coffee in a prep period that I had, and the math teachers, the science teachers, the English teachers, they were all friends. They were all working hard, and there it was. Okay, at the same time they're building this major addition, they are completely revamping the curriculum. It had been traditional. 12th grade English, 11th grade American literature, and down. So anyway, we worked for a year and a half designing this curriculum, which ended up with the AP courses stayed the same on 11th and 12th grade. Ninth grade regular and 10th grade regular stayed the same, and then all the rest of the courses in the English curriculum were elective courses. We had 30 plus English teachers in the high school at Mount Lebanon High School. That's a lot of English teachers. And we worked crazy times, summer and winter, on that curriculum, and it was great. And it went to all of our different strengths as we designed it, and we'd go in small groups. We came out with it, and one day my boss, Dr. Huffman, called me, Henry, I called him, and he said, Maggie, I think, we were all looking for materials, new materials, and he called me and he said, Maggie, I think I have something for you. Take a look at this. I opened it up. They tore down the 6-story one that they built and built a whole new one. Paul and I toured this one, and it's the current one right now. It's just been built. And this book, I knew when I opened it up, it was special. The next page. It was like this. Well, I loved art, and I loved the thematic structure of this work. Every unit in this had music and art with it. And in my classroom, for every course I taught, I had bulletin boards filled with appropriate things for that particular course. And I'm going to I taught a lot of different things there, but I'm going to focus on 3 courses. So this was one of them, the next one. This was one, the next one, and the next one. Okay, here we are. There it is. I'm going to speak a little bit about this because it was Euripides' Medea and Ibsen's Hedda Gabler. So we have the ancient and Greek, and we have the modern, it's Norwegian. And Ibsen's the first modernist. Both women are of high birth. They're typical tragic heroes. And what happened, many of you know Medea. And many of you know Hedda Gabler. They are very much alike and very different in different eras. It was a wonderful thing to teach. Then, following that, okay, now I'm going to put my glasses on. Excuse me, and if you can't see those, I'm going to read them to you. I focused on 10th grade honors course, the comparative European literature, which is what this is, and is that 10th grade?
Yeah.
That's 10th grade. 10th grade honors, a very difficult course. Those kids went on to the advanced placement, which was 11th and 12th grade, because that's college credit for 12th grade. Can you read that at all? If you can't, which I can't. Beowulf, love Beowulf. Grendel and all that business. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, Shakespeare's Macbeth, Dickens's Great Expectations, the Romantic Movement, that's Keats, Shelley, Byron, Wordsworth, and the modern poetry, Camus' Stranger and Myth of Sisyphus, Kafka's Metamorphosis, Sartre's No Exit, and Flannery O'Connor's Greenleaf, which is American. She was, lived in Savannah. They just did a special on her with PBS. Did you see it? Great. And Hemingway's Dos Cervezos in Spanish, 2 beers. Read that story. So that was the basis of that course. And it was very difficult for them. But in comparative European literature, this one, I designed the curriculum for this, and it was the one that I really loved this. And this was the textbook, but...
Microphone.
Sorry, I get excited about these things. I threw in 3 novels in addition to all the work that was in here. And the 3 novels were Flaubert's Madame Bovary, which is a hoot. I love that thing. And Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and Goethe's Faust. Now, one thing about the first unit in comparative European literature is the art of failure, because everything was in translation, and you cannot translate perfectly. But we had the best translations we could get. So for each one of them, I would have other translations. And for instance, I brought the Faust, Part 2, which is this, illustrated by a Delacroix, but here was what I used in class. And you can see it's all in pieces. But this was a translation I used there. This was a different translation. And then the kids who were taking German, they said, well, Ms. Posey, we read this in German. I said, well, which one do you like better? And they said, the German one. I said, yes, that's the art of failure, translation. So it was an exciting course to teach. Now, who took it? Here's the important thing. I was a C student. I didn't want this for honors students. I wanted this for the kid like me who didn't get it, was afraid of it. My goal was to create a path so these kids would really understand that it was accessible to them. And that's what I insisted on. I fought the administration on this for quite a while. They wanted to make it an honors course. I said, no. If a kid elects it, he didn't have to take it. If he elects it, he wants to be there, or his mother wants him to be there, or his counselor wants him to be there, but somebody wants him to be there. And it became very successful. So I was very pleased with it. And the third one I did was the Irish. But that came later, and for that we did, is it the Irish? Yeah. Too bad I can't read. The Celtic mythology. Oh, I fell in love with Ireland. Cuchulainn, the epic hero, Finn McCool, the folk hero, Sean O'Casey's Juno and the Paycock, John Milling Sing's Playboy of the Western World, Brendan Behan's The Hostage, one of my favorites. William Butler Yeats' poetry, well, Yeats' poetry, what can you say? Best. James Joyce short stories. And I did study then at the University College Dublin, Yeats International School in Sligo, and at Trinity for Joyce. I paid for all those courses myself. In the meantime, I was going to Pitt and Duquesne to take courses just to give me more background. So I studied all the time, but I loved it. So that was my recreation for many, many years. And so now, comparative European literature. One day, I was called into Henry's office, and he said, Maggie, I submitted your curriculum for European Lit to the National Council of Teachers of English. And I said, oh, really? Me? And they selected it for the convention in Atlanta. This is 1990. And we're sending you there. And Judy Waddell, who taught 11th grade AP and science fiction, which was very big at our school. And so, okay. And so you're going to present your curriculum there. It's a panel. They've selected, it was either 9 or 10 from around the United States of all different things. And that's, you're going to be speaking then. Well, I made the big time. I mean, this is Monmouth College graduate with C's in English. And I'm going to the National Council of Teachers. Do you realize how many English teachers there are in the nation? Every kid has to take 4 years of English. That's a lot, thousands of English teachers. Every hotel in Atlanta was filled with English teachers. So we get there, Judy and I, and we go to all the sessions, and I'm scheduled for the last day. And we go to all the sessions, and they're great, and we're having a wonderful time. The night before, at the big banquet, before the last day, the president of the NCTE comes out on the stage, and he says, I have a surprise for you. Mel Gibson, the actor, is in town, and he has brought his newest film, which is going to be shown tomorrow at the Fox Theater, and he is giving us tickets, so it's first come, first serve, and it's Hamlet. Joy? Oh, skip that one. Hamlet. With Mel Gibson as Hamlet, Glenn Close as Gertrude, Alan Bates, my favorite actor, as Claudius, and Helena Bonham Carter as Ophelia, directed by Franco Zeffirelli. Where do you think the English teachers go? Busted. My luck ran out. But I think, what a way to go. I was the luckiest teacher in America. I made it. Mr. Mishner said, "You'll do it." Thank you. Isn't that wonderful? And that's it. Any questions? Come on, ask me a question. I did go to the Irish, and I did a lot of studying there, and I found, if I have a moment, how much time do I have, Joy?
I guess about 15 minutes if you...
Oh, well, let me tell you a little bit about the Irish. Oh,
You're going to use the podium.
it's going to fall. Okay. Okay. The Irish. I didn't know anything about the Irish, and they asked me to take it because I'd done the European Lit. Well, I can't do that unless I go to study, and so I did go, and I just couldn't believe. I had the archaeologist who had done the New Grange. Has anybody been to New Grange in Ireland? Oh, yeah. Anybody? Well, it's an archaeological dig, and he was in the process of doing it. It is now almost, they're having trouble because too many tourists are there. But he took us down in this. This is a prehistoric dig, and you can see once a year the sun comes in this one little place. I'm short, and I had to crawl through it. These are the kinds of professors I had there in Ireland. And it was all the Celtic mythology. Wonderful. What I found about Irish literature was it's so simple and so sophisticated, so complex. And to me, if you compare Dostoevsky, and I don't think he ever has a laugh in his work. I go back to that time I was on the river in Ohio, the Ohio River. One whole summer, I read Dostoevsky's Possessed, The Possessed. And believe me, I was possessed by the end of it. But the Irish, they always have humor. They always have tragedy. And they always have music and dancing in all their literature. It seems very simple when you read it. And when you understand it, you have to know the Celtic mythology to really understand it. And that was the sophistication of Irish literature. So I became hooked on that, and I taught it, and that was a great, great time. And then Yeats, and I went to the International School at Sligo. It was full of Yeatsian scholars from around the world. They are far out, way far out. But it was interesting. I liked it. So you could have 3 lectures on the 2 words cold eye. Yeats is in one of his poems. I mean, it was crazy. And then finally, Trinity for James Joyce. Now, and I had read Ulysses by that time. Have anybody read Ulysses? Yes. Okay. That's, of course, stream of consciousness, so you have to get into it. So you go with the flow on that one. But, so I was going to go over and study it. The notes I have my Joyce upstairs. The notes for it are as thick as the book. The references, all the incredible references for it. But we were to do Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. Well, we, at Trinity for the whole thing, we didn't get more than halfway through Ulysses because there's just so much there. So anyway, Molly Bloom's soliloquy at the end, one of my favorites anyway. So that was my Irish, and it was wonderful.
How did you use the Irish music?
Oh, I always had music for every class. That was one of the things with this man in literature, that all of the material was accompanied by art and music. Symphonies, for instance, and I can't remember which story it was, but Leonard Bernstein's Kaddish, Kaddish, it's a beautiful, beautiful symphony, and it's man's argument with God, and it's magnificent. And of course, then you get the rainbow, the covenant. Oh, it's wonderful. They're all wonderful. So anyway, and then for the lonely, in the Lonely People, one of the units, it was the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby. All of the Lonely People. So there was a variety for every single one of them, of these thematics. In this Faust edition, I have all of the illustrations are by Delacroix. So it was all art, all music. We had a humanities department as well, and they did a little bit of literature, but they focused on the art and the music and the theater. I focused on the literature, accompanied, but we worked hand in hand, and they were actually part of the English department too. Yeah. Another question? Yes.
When you talked about Irish literature, you gave me another oxymoron. You said simple, sophisticated.
Yes, definitely. To read it, to see it in the plays particularly, Sean O'Casey, John Millington Synge, Brendan Behan, the language is simple, but the underlying message is very sophisticated because everything starts with the ancient Celtic mythology and then comes up through the Troubles. And that was the thing about the Irish, of course, was the famines and all with the British taking the land, and the Irish ascendancy, the Anglo-Irish ascendancy in Dublin, who had all the land, and of course the Irish themselves were destroyed as a result of it. That all goes through the literature. In Ireland, I was there during the Troubles, and I was evacuated 3 times out of places because of bomb threats, and that's a good experience because you realize that it's an active thing. We're starting to realize that here. It's an active thing that's going on. And again, so many stories. Did I explain that well enough to you, that it's the words, but it's the background of what it's talking about? Another one? Another question?
Do I have to tell your fame to my family?
I'm sorry.
The connection between you and my family.
Oh, yes. Joan is new here, and she explained that her family, by the last name of Alex, they were in the school.
No, Julie.
No, Mrs.
Julie.
Sarowitz.
Julie Sarowitz.
Sarowitz.
You were her 9th grade teacher.
Julie Sarowitz.
I can't see.
Oh, okay. I'm here.
Oh, yes, I had Julie, her daughter, in my 9th grade class.
And she only wanted to know what the children thought of her. I said, fine, right? You were a fair teacher.
But I was tough.
No, but you were fair. That was the whole point. And you asked me about that other one, and I said, you know what I'm talking about.
No.
Your friend.
Oh,
You know.
no.
Mrs. Renault.
know.
Oh, oh, yes. I don't know what you,
Tell them about your famous student. Who was your most famous student?
who was my favorite student?
No, famous.
You had asked me once about yourself and Mrs. Raynaud, and I was honest. It's really the good one.
I don't
The fair one.
I'm going to pass on that.
The other question was your famous student.
Well, some of you know. Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban, the entrepreneur, is on Shark Tank and all that. He was in my homeroom. Homerooms we had for 4 years. And they came in as ninth grade, and then we graduated them. And Mark was in my homeroom, and then he took the comparative European class. Okay, I will tell you about this. Mark left his junior year. Did he drop out? Not exactly. His counselor, he went to his counselor. He came from a modest family in Mount Lebanon. He sold garbage bags door to door when he was a kid, about 11 years old. And he found that in Mount Lebanon, they didn't have enough business courses. We had economics, but we didn't have business courses per se. So he talked his counselor into letting him go to Pitt at night, University of Pittsburgh, and take night courses in business. And for that, he was then given credit as being a high school graduate. But I did not graduate him because he left his junior year. But here's the key. He took comparative European literature because he wanted to. Nobody had him do that. So the mind, of course, was there. And then I had his brother the next 4 years. And but I love watching Mark when I do see it, because if you've watched it, you know his demeanor. I use that word. He sits back and he doesn't say anything, and he didn't in European Lit either. He was 17 or 16 years old. But then when something, and it was all discussion. I didn't have classes seated like this. I had them in a U shape, and it was all discussion, never any quizzes. It was all essay. Our composition program was very, very straight and very strict, good. And he'd sit there, and when something interesting would come up out of whatever, Faust or Dostoevsky, he'd lean forward, just the same way he does in the Shark Tank. And I say, yeah, that's the same kid, fleshier and older, and much richer. But would I have known it? No. But there are many others from Mount Lebanon who also were that
Did you ever have Dan
success.
London?
Who?
Dan London. He became a Broadway actor, and he was also in, what was it?
Was that Joe Manganiello? No.
No, Dan London. Dan London. He's a Broadway actor, and he's also on
Dan,
D-A-N, London.
yes, Dan London. Yes, I did have him in 10th grade advanced. Yes. Yeah, I did. But anyway, so that is what I did. Anybody else? Okay. Took a fast.